Hey, y'all, welcome to Geek Freaks. I am Frank, and today I'm with Andrew Ossian. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Frank?
I'm doing excellent. Andrew, you wrote two books now, Spellbinders books. First one is Not So Chosen One, and the second one is Break the Game. What are these books about?
So these books are about, I would say they're almost autobiographical in a way, more than my other books. So these are the first two books I've had come out in a while.
Mhm.
I think I had four books before that, like YA, and then another middle grade book, which was a science fiction book. But that was back in like the early 2000s. Spellbinders is the first book I've had in a while. I'm super excited about the series. They're very much inspired by the fact that I'm a video game developer by day and a gamer by hobby and kind of a lifetime gamer of all kinds. And then I've always written for kids, and I kind of wanted to do something that was a combination of those two, like a hybrid of the gamer and the writer. The series is about a kid named Ben who deals with the trauma and the obstacles in his real personal life that he goes through as a young person, a middle schooler. He deals with those things by disappearing into the games where he finds control. He finds a modicum of power in a world where he doesn't have much power. Like as a kid, you just don't have a lot of control over what you do every day, and your life seems like it's on rails a little bit.
Mhm.
Like me and like a lot of us, he kind of disappears into the game worlds, the game rules, and his fandom. And what the first book in the series is called Spellbinders, the Not So Chosen One. And that sort of introduces this idea of where Ben is going through this huge transition. His parents are separating, and he has been moved out to the burbs from the city with his mom, and he has no friends, and he's feeling more isolated and more powerless than he ever has. And um, he is designing a game kind of to give his life structure.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is he meets this mysterious young girl who he thinks is a cosplayer at a local convention. When she tells him that he is the chosen one, he follows her thinking it's, some sort of awesome interactive game or something else. And he ends up finding out that this world is very real that she's from. She's from a fantastical world, and that he actually is looked upon as the chosen one. And that's a lot more responsibility, and it's a lot more pain than he ever actually thought it would be. He thought being a hero would be great. You got all
Yeah.
these powers and everything. And so the second book in the series just came out, Spellbinders Break the Game, and it kind of widens the world. It opens the world up of Spellbinders, introduces us to new fantastical worlds. They're called realms and Spellbinders that are very inspired by games like gaming levels that would be familiar with who play video games or thematic board games. And it introduces new characters, and it's sort of this heightening of everything about Spellbinders, which is kind of a fun riff on the tropes of fantasy and of games.
Mhm.
And this just kind of continues in that tradition. It's really silly, a lot of fun action sequences, and it's a good vibe as far as the
That
characters
is.
go. It's all about like a party of misfits kind of getting along.
The good vibe is a really good way to put it. It is very lighthearted while still harkening back to those
Hmm.
themes that, as a kid, divorce, moving, friends, all the complications that can happen when you're a kid, and yet he's still kind of like getting lost in this fantasy world and still learning lessons there. What was your motivation for making a book for middle grade?
I just love the middle grade age.
Hmm.
It's funny. I had the launch event for Spellbinders Break the Game last night. The book came out a couple weeks ago, but like the official launch event was last night. And the majority of the audience is kids, right, in sort of my wheelhouse age group, which is like 9 to 12,
Hmm.
fourth, fifth, sixth grade. And they're just the best. Like they have such an incredible outlook on life. They are so creative, so quick on their feet, so interested in everything and curious, and they're funny as hell. And I just have always gone back to the books that I read at that age and how they kind of inspired me to become the person I am today and have the hobbies, the interests, and the kind of personality that I have grown into as an adult. It all started at those books and games and everything that I experienced at that age. So it's kind of me revisiting that with the hindsight of being an adult, but then also trying to sort of keep that feeling going for young readers now,
Yeah.
especially now, because things can seem pretty overwhelming and dark at times. I think that laughter is a really important thing. Laughter and sort of whimsy.
How hard is it to try to, use your own personal experiences, but then adapt it for kids nowadays with social media and their phones so readily available?
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually found the phone question really interesting, especially when you're going through to other worlds. Like there's a lot of discussion about connectivity and the ability to actually reach back home, and that I mean that's it's kind of a huge cheat actually when you're using it disappearing into a fantastical world. So in this series, it doesn't come up all that often, and when it does, it's usually as a joke. It's usually as the fact that like people in these other realms don't understand the technology, or in some cases think the technology is cute and sort of outdated. And there's always a question of how important are the things that we do on our phone when like things get down to brass tacks and things are
Yeah.
happening in the moment. It's like that kind of stuff falls away, and you have to pay attention to what's going on in the present, and you can't kind of have those distractions as much as you would sort of in our everyday lives as people in our world.
Now, in the first one, Ben, of course, he becomes a hero of Lux, and he's wanting to go back. And then we have this, these frogmen show up, and he learns that there's some more spellbinders and stuff like that out there. How do you evolve the lessons taught from the first one into the second one? How are you going to teach him something new?
That's a great question. I struggled with that a lot actually because there a lot happens in the first book, and there is an obstacle that is overcome, and there's this crucible event that brings the party together, right? And they all kind of have these individual arcs and journeys that they go on and learn something about themselves. And with Ben, it was kind of staring me in the face because at first I wasn't sure. It's like, how do I give somebody who is considered the chosen one by people who are misreading these prophecies, let's put it that way. And he ends up rejecting the calling, even though it's something that he thinks he's wanted his whole life. He ends up, which is a very common thing to do with the hero trope is that you are a reluctant hero. And, but he ends up coming back. And even though he's not the one that they thought they wanted, he ends up sort of still being somebody who helps and enables others to overcome this challenge. I'm being very vague because I don't want to be too spoiler about the first book. But so the second book, it's like he has made he's had these great achievements. He's learned a lot about himself. So where do we go from there? And it took me a while to realize that if I were in his shoes and I was surrounded by these extraordinary heroes who are heroes from Lux, and one of them is a great balladeer and adventurer. And he has his own set of stories and songs sung about him. And one is this mysterious assassin who's got all this amazing training. And then one can shapeshift and do these amazing things. And Ben starts to feel inadequate around the people that kind of made him feel adequate or secure in his own life. Suddenly, even though they're not projecting that onto him, he can't help but feel like, if I'm going to be a hero in this amazing group of people, I'm the least amazing one. And how do I deal with that? So he ends up trying to come up with a solution to make himself worthy of being a part of this found family that he's put together.
That makes so much sense for like the next stage of your life when you're in middle school, and you're going from figuring out who you are into figuring out how you are with other people around you and that social dynamic. And so putting a fantasy element on that is great fun. With Ben, knowing fantasy, being an outside observer, jumped into it, does he have any advantages that he could use? Maybe knowing fantasy tropes or expecting this out of a ranger type or something like that?
Yeah, that's something I try to play up as often as possible. And it's exactly as you explained, right? It's like that he has this embedded sense of how these structures work, how these systems work. And I think one of the fun things about the first book, and it plays out more in the second book, is that he has expectations because he's been trained to think about these tropes and these structures in a certain way. And when they don't behave as he's expecting, he gets frustrated or he's kind of bummed out. I mean, whether it's finding out that people actually die in battles or that magic doesn't work how you expected it to, things like that. And he's able to recognize situations where different characteristic skills and opportunities will arise and he can take advantage of them. And I think that's why they make him the leader, is because he's so well studied in these things that happen to them, and everyone else kind of takes them as they come, and he kind of can deconstruct them in a way that's unique to him. And I think that's a celebration of those of us who sort of drill down into lore and into things that in games and things like that, where every little thing about a character, or every move in a fight, fighting set or whatever, stuff like that.
If I get thrown into World of Warcraft, if I'm in the middle of Azeroth,
That's
I'm
right.
gonna be the top wizard in town. I know exactly what to do.
I mean, you'll sort of be the chosen one, right? Like you'll know
Yeah.
everything. It'll be like, who is this person? It's like in Groundhog Day when she's like, "Are you God?" He's like, "Maybe I don't know. Maybe God was just around long enough to know everything."
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Learn the
So
piano immediately.
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
well, I gotta say, you have an amazing collection of books behind you right now, and it's so distracting because I'm like, okay, D&D
Oh,
books. I think that's Sandman. It's so good. What was your inspirations for this? Like any kind of books or anything like that that you pulled maybe from your childhood?
yeah. So I have a like my background in tabletop and tabletop RPGs goes back a long way, but for many of those years, I wasn't. I would say up until I was in about high school, I wasn't a player of a lot of
Hmm.
them. I was obsessed with their manuals. I had
Wow.
friends who would bring them to social gatherings. So I was very much like a 1980s kid on a bike lifestyle. Like that's what I grew up in. I grew up in the burbs in Ohio,
Hmm.
and we would leave in the morning 9 a.m. and not come back until 7 when it was time for dinner, and we'd be on our bikes, and that's how we got around. And we would stop at different people's homes, and we would go through the sewers, and it was just sort of like one giant weird adventure. And one of the things that we did was, we would either play board games, go to the comic store, or we would just like pore over game manuals that we didn't necessarily understand. We were too young to
Yeah.
really like grasp a lot of the complex rules of some of these. And these were everything like D&D to um, Frontiers, Top Secret. Uh, there was the Robotech game, and like anything my friends could get their hands on, we would read the manuals, but we would never like actually carve out time to play them because they seemed
Yeah.
too complex for us.
Oh yeah.
But we were just in love with the look of them, right? Like
Hmm.
uh, monster manuals are incredible. It's just with the art in them and what it
Yeah.
does to your young imagination and thinking about how all that worked together. So I would actually sit down and create character sheets and go through and create like manuals in the style of those using the story ideas that I had. So that's something that's kind of been with me my whole life. And I collect board games, but I end up reading the instructions to them much more often than I actually end up getting many of them to the table. I have a lot of games that I have opened and not punched, but that I've read the instructions just because I'm curious how they create mechanics and systems that feel thematic for whatever story they're trying to tell. That's kind of where my interests are. So the inspiration for this book was definitely a long time coming.
Yeah, yeah, and that whole tabletop game, one of the better things of like Magic the Gathering or the D&D player books and stuff is again that art. And you had a great artist on this as well, Lisa Weber. What was it
Hmm.
like working with Lisa on adding some of the art to these books?
Yeah, well, I'm embarrassed to say I've never actually spoken with Lisa,
Oh,
and
okay,
it's one of those things where in publishing, you never kind of know how your relationship with an artist is going to be.
I
I've
see.
never written a picture book, but like picture book collaborations are kind of the most, I would say, the most frequently done, and
Hmm.
those can be a team of people who come in with a book idea together, or more often I think it's a writer has a book that's written and then they team with an illustrator, and like how they work together is very much like the style based on their personalities and working styles and
Yeah.
their process. And with Lisa and I, it was I was talking to my editorial team, and they were the designer was pitching us ideas for different people they've worked with before and like what style we were going for. So we get samples of different work that various artists. And because Lisa does her own comic and is an incredibly talented illustrator, she was able to like capture the spirit of Spellbinders
Yeah.
incredibly well. And I knew from the very beginning that I wanted interior illustrations and stat blocks
Hmm.
and things like that in there. So that was something we knew from the beginning. We needed the same person who did the cover to treat the inside like a dungeon manual. And so that
Exactly.
was something I mean, we're working on the third one now, and it's always like the best part of the process is seeing those sketches and working on those pieces
Yeah.
of content.
Little treat that comes in, seeing something you imagine
Oh
come to
yeah,
life. Those
it's the best.
the stat blocks was a real delight to see those because they feel real. They feel like something that you could play in a game. And
Yeah,
what were some of the thoughts that went into that? Were you trying to make characters that felt playable with weaknesses and strengths?
that's a great question. So those would say kind of oscillate between really challenging and really easy. Like
Hmm.
they have there's a voice in the Spellbinders series that is, kind of a heightened, silly voice. I mean, I guess I would say it's Ben's voice, but it's like you said before, the story has stakes, but the characters and their chemistry and their banter and some of the things that happen are very silly and kind of over the top and fun and unexpected. And I do that because I like to surprise myself when I'm writing these books, because they're, it's hard to write a book. I have a full-time day job, and so I like to make the time enjoyable for me as much as I do for the reader. And I think that translates pretty well to the end product. But when I wrote those, um, some of them I had ahead of time. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but a lot of the time I would write the book out and from a story perspective, and then go back and say, okay, what here really feels like a good candidate for a character sheet or an encounter table or something like that. And most of the time they were pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And then the writing for those different entries would be really easy. And then other times I would be like, okay, I want to do another one here. Is it illustrated or is it not illustrated? I have to figure that out. And then like you have to write it. And writing funny is really hard. And I don't know if I do it successfully all the time, but I like to think I do. But trying to make those funny, sort of just doing them on their own outside of the writing of the rest of the book, was kind of hard sometimes. Definitely was a challenge. But like I said, I'd like to think I did an okay job with most of them. So
Absolutely, very charming is one thing I got to throw out there. Is these
Oh, great.
feel
That's
very
a great
charming?
word.
They're a wonderful read. So this was a return to writing for you. I want to kind of tap into that writing process for you. When you get this idea, how do you tackle this project from day one? Are you jumping right in, or are you just kind of storyboarding it out?
Yeah, I definitely work from a character point of view. I start
Okay.
with a character or a scenario, like a scene. The very first book I ever published was in 2005, and it started with literally with a scene where I was like, okay, what if this was the case? What if it was a young person who's like 15, but they have to sit at the table with their family in a high chair, and like why is that happening? I just had this very specific idea, this very vivid picture in my head, and it ended up being a story about twins, one of whom has a growth hormone deficiency where he grows at a much slower pace than his brother, he's grown up into this massive high schooler, and he looks like he's about 9, and it was their relationship as twins. Um, but that's usually how they start. They start with a character in a scene, and then multiple other characters that I then give voice to, and it's kind of how they spark and bounce off each other.
Hmm.
And they tell me what their stories are, as opposed to me saying, "Oh, I saw a cool little idea in the paper in an article about something, a heist or something. I think that would make a great story." I'm much more like, this character is interesting to me for whatever reason at first, and they kind of get stuck in my brain. But with Spellbinders, I think, unlike a lot of the books that I've written, was very much like I wanted to write a book with dungeon entries, with all of those cool graphic elements that are in those manuals, and I wanted it to be a love letter to my gamer self, game design, and people who just are in love with genre stuff, all of the worlds that I walk in and the people that I love to spend my time with. And I knew that from the very beginning that that's what the project was going to be. And now, as I'm thinking ahead, like I know my next project, I want it to be sort of a horror book for young people. I want it to be, I have a certain idea for it and a certain structure for it. And so that will come from a more macro place. I'll start from a higher level and then figure out the details. But traditionally, I definitely focus on characters like Ben.
That's interesting to go from the character place out and then macro in. It's almost two different ways of
Yeah,
approaching it, but it'll be interesting
it's
to see how
unusual. I don't
the
normally
out.
do that.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Now, this feels like a lore dump in a way, right? There's so much lore coming
Mhm.
at a reader, but there has to be so much more that you had planned or that were in your head. How hard is it to narrow down characters, maybe merge characters into one, or narrow down
Mhm.
settings so that it's more readable and less of a handbook for D&D?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that that's part of the process. The part of the writing
Mhm.
process is you can come away with a book that's twice as long, where you've added all of those things that you really wanted to add, but then you realize what's integral to the story, what has to be there in order to tell like for Spellbinders Break the Game, once we realized that Ben was going to try to make himself worthy of being a hero among these other extraordinary people, and actually be able to kind of carry the title or the responsibility of being a spellbinder, which is a person who has these books that allow them to write spells that um, can summon creatures or create things in the environment. They allow him to change the reality around him, and it's an incredible power that he doesn't feel fit to carry. And his friends, in a joking, teasing way, sort of also say that he's probably not the best person to go walking around with this magical book. So once we figured out that his journey in this book was going to be him trying to find a roadmap, for lack of a better term, which he finds in a game manual, which is, duh, right? Like a gamer who is trying to figure out how to become a great hero. His idol game designer who designed his favorite RPG also has a book about creating characters, creating heroic characters. And he kind of sees that and he's like, so these are like the 10 steps I need to follow, kind of like a self-help book that you would do for like a business program or dealing with people or whatever. And once we saw that as the roadmap, the kind of the bullet path we were following, you start to say, okay, all of these additional lore things, these other worlds that you created, characters you created, you can cut them out and you can prune them and it will not affect that story. And you kind of have to, because otherwise the book will be too long. It's very expensive to print books right now. I mean, it's always expensive, but I think right now it's particularly expensive. So they try to be economical about how long these things are. And then for young readers too, you have to be very aware of how long a book is, because even just seeing a book of a certain size can intimidate a reluctant reader and make them say, I'm not interested.
That takes me back to Goosebumps. They were always a little bit thinner than you'd expect.
So great.
Yeah. And then it was like, oh, those are easy. You could pick them up 150 pages and you're good. So yeah. That's a very good point.
Yeah, it's a big thing right now. They're definitely a lot, like with graphic novels and things. There's those can be bigger because the kids can pick them up and open it and see, oh, I can read this. But with a larger book, that's like, if you like some of those Harry Potter books and things from 20 years ago, those are sort of what people are saying. Do not do more of these. This is not an era for those right now.
Well, even looking at those Harry Potter books, they got bigger as they went. So it's like as the reader grew, so did the book. So it kind of made sense. It went with their reading level.
That's a great point.
Now, speaking to the game designer in you, when approaching this, was there any sort of elements of like, because of course, like if you're thinking of a movie, 3-act structure, but with a video game, it's a little bit different, right? Were you kind of implementing some of your game designer knowledge into writing a book?
Yeah, so we had a lot of early meetings when we were working on this concept, and I was writing the book, where we were very wary about certain elements going into the books because we didn't want readers to mistake it for a game.
Yeah.
Like there are books out there for young people, and I mean, I would say for every reader, but there are definitely ones aimed at younger readers where there are gaming components to them. Mm-hmm. And this was not something where you were trying to like play the book. And especially with so many, it was with these very distinctive visual elements that remind you of game instructions or a game manual. We realized immediately that would be something that might be an issue. So I actually pushed in the opposite direction, trying to make, the references are all like every game or movie or comic or whatever is some sort of riff on something, but none of it's real. It's all kind of a little bit too silly. And then most of the game elements are pretty standard. And we never go into explicitly describing how anything happens or any game is actually played. It's all kind of, for lack of a better term, like word salad, or familiar enough to where you'll recognize it if you're somebody who plays games, but not something you'll be like, I'm interested. Like, how's the logic of that mechanic work? Nothing like that. So it was something we worked on really hard, because I would have loved to have done something that was actually like a game that you could get into. But at the same time, I understood their concerns about that, because we were hoping to appeal to people who had no familiarity with games, all the way up to the people who are, huge fans and gamers their whole lives.
It's got to be so hard to do. Just as I'm thinking of like, if I were to try to create a story in that kind of world, immediately thinking of boss battles and having to collect this magic item that makes the boss easier or something like that. And it's just like, oh, those are all gaming mechanics. That's tough.
That's right. I mean, there was a point when I was in a couple of books by colleagues of mine, friends of mine have done this successfully, but like, do I want to go down the choose your own adventure road for one of the books in the series? And it like suddenly turns into a piece of interactive fiction where he's trapped in sort of like the confines of those choices. And what, we all know that every choose your own adventure has like, 8 out of the 10 endings are terrible deaths and things like that. So it's that could be a pretty, anxiety producing situation to get caught in. But at that point, I realized that it wasn't about the games as much as it was about the party and the players and the characters and the
Yeah.
friends that he made.
Which is what's going to actually resonate with the kids reading the book. If you're that middle grade level, is when you're having this
Hmm.
complicated relationships that don't seem complicated nowadays to us, but at the time, it's our whole world is, does Becky like me, or is Max mad at me or something like that? It's everything at that time.
Yeah, so true.
Again, touching on the video game design or video game designer, is there anything in particular you've worked on recently that we might know?
Yeah, we just announced, or not we, but they just announced the new Life is Strange
Oh, nice.
sequel, which I was involved in for its entire. I was actually when I left the project, I was the one who'd been on it the longest, and I was there from the very early stages. So I wrote on that, and that was really exciting. And then before that, I worked on the Expanse game, which was based on the Expanse show. I wrote on that, and before that, I was kind of doing a bunch of different. I was consulting with a bunch of different studios on different things. And I'm working at ZeniMax now, which does Elder Scrolls Online, and I'm working on a project over there. So it's
And you're not going to tell me
pretty
that
good
project, I'm
stuff.
sure.
Oh, sure. I'm not. My lips are sealed. But
Yeah.
it's great. It's great working with new people and people I've worked with for a long time. And I feel very fortunate that I've been able to work on I'm a huge history buff, and so I've been working on 4X games and RTSs, and I get to do that. And I get to work on open world fantasy games, and I worked on a whole interactive fiction project, which was never released, but it was fantastic. And then I get to work on Life is Strange and, narrative adventure games. As a writer, that's sort of the brass ring. So it's been a huge part of kind of how I approach most of my fiction as well. Has been either it's I'm tired of writing with those, mechanic restrictions, or those, the things about having to deal with the direction of a whole team. That's one of the things I love, is that I get to go back and forth between this stuff's only for me. Spellbinders is me being me in a weird way, and
Yeah.
having whatever silly fun I want to have. And then I get to go work on these projects with these large teams that have very, collaboratively driven narrative direction. And I love working together with other people, other creative people. That's such a joy that I get to experience. And that's what I love about game development. So I get to kind of have my cake and eat it too. And I feel really lucky
Yeah.
about that. But yeah, a lot
And
of good projects.
it sounds like based on the games you were talking about, the teams have gotten bigger over time. If you're working at ZeniMax now, it's got to be a pretty good sized team at this point.
Yeah, I mean, an MMO team with all of its support structures and everything like that is definitely probably one of the biggest teams you could find. I worked on a team it's kind of quaint now, but when I worked on Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning, the open world RPG back in early 2000.
Absolutely love that game. Are you for real? You worked on that game? Oh my
Oh,
God.
heck yeah. I worked on the I don't know if they were considered any good, but I also worked on some of the DLC that came out years later. But yeah, no, I worked on the original, and I was there when it got converted over from what it was being worked on it was being worked on as a totally different project. And then 38 Studios bought our company, Big Huge, and turned it into Reckoning. And I was there for that whole thing, and it was quite a ride.
Never would have. I mean, real quick side story. Now that you've opened up that can of worms.
Yeah. No, I'm awesome. A fan of Reckoning is a fan of mine. I mean, is a friend of mine. So
I'm at GameStop and I'm like, I need a good RPG. I need something that I would need hours, because I think I was fresh off of Skyrim or Oblivion or something like that. I need something that I could just dump hours into. And Reckoning came up, the guy over there, and I was such a big fan. And then all of a sudden it was no sequels. What? It's so good though. What a beautifully designed world. It was really cool.
isn't that is awesome? I think it was great because when Skyrim came out, we were all terrified, of course, because they were, it was a new IP, new studio, not a new studio, but the new parent company was trying to launch this big IP. And then, you have to deal with that. Right down the road, literally, was Bethesda, Maryland, and Bethesda, they know what they're doing. And so when they first came out with Skyrim, we were like, oh, we're screwed or whatever. But I think because we drew such a strong contrast with it in terms of the art design and the fantastical elements of it, it was just so bright and bold and colorful, and it just really leaned in to the vibrancy of that world, as opposed to the grays of Skyrim and everything, which is cool in its own right. I think that the art design in the game is amazing. The combat was incredible.
That's the thing. I had my favorite was the two sights. I think what were the two circular blades or whatever.
Chakrams.
Chakrams.
Yeah.
Oh my, so fast. It was so cool looking. Yeah, it was a spectacle. Yeah.
yeah. So fun. I still love that game.
It's a good one. Oh man, that was a good blast from the past. That's a cool game. Okay, so let's get everybody pointed in the right direction. Spellbinders, the sequel is out now. Break the Game. And you have a third one you're currently working on. We're probably pretty far away from that one being ready to go, right? Just to kind of get people going there.
Yeah. No, that's it's funny. Like I uh, just got the cover sketch for the third one today, and it's like already blowing my mind because it looks amazing.
Yeah.
That will be next summer, next June. So we're doing like a June.
Okay.
Every June is a new one. So it'll be next June. And the paperback of Break the Game will come out probably a couple months before that. So right now it's available in hardcover, and the paperback will be available next spring. And yeah, we'll see where it goes from there.
That's perfect. All right. Well, I'm hoping you come back for that third book so we can talk about.
Oh, I'd love to.
This.
Yeah.
That's excellent. All right, guys, go into the links in the description. I'm going to have the links to both books and Andrew's social media so you guys can click around and start following everything up. And thank you very much for joining me today, Andrew.
Oh, gosh. Thanks a lot, Frank. It's been really fun.
Yeah. All right. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.